Hi, my name is Phil Metzger, and in 1992 I moved to Moscow, Russia. From there I lived in the beautiful Central European country of Hungary, where my family and I spent the next 20 years living, learning, and sharing about Jesus. Different foods, culture, and language, but underneath it all, we discovered the most amazing people. We learned that to share the gospel effectively, we had to adjust. We had to cross cultures. Now we're back in the U.S., and we're discovering that this country is a melting pot of culture. This show is committed to helping Christians connect to those who think, believe, and live differently than them. This is Crossing Cultures. All right, well, thanks for joining me on this episode of Crossing Cultures. As you can tell, my partner in crime, Nick Roach, is not here. He bailed out on me. Nick bailed on me. That's not true. He's watching right now, and he's going to be mad that I said that, and he might beat me up. Nick did not bail out on me. I'm going to be joined by two amazing guys, and we're going to have a conversation, and so we just felt like we're just going to do this, the three of us. Our topic today that I want to talk about, I'm going to be inviting in two great guys who both pastor churches. They're both Calvary churches, part of the network that I'm a part of, Calvary Chapel. One is in Los Angeles area, and then one is on the East Coast. And both of these men are African American, and they have been pastoring in a white evangelical Christian movement. And I thought it'd be a great opportunity to sit down with them via Zoom, because it's still COVID, and we would talk about the issues that they've faced and that they are facing, and maybe help us bridge some of these gaps that, there's blind spots that we don't understand that I know these guys are going to give us great insight into. So let me welcome them into. So first I've got Bill Buffington. Bill, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, man. I'm blessed to be here with you guys.
Oh my gosh, it's so cool. And okay, Bill, you've pastored for 10 years. We were just talking about it. 10 years, the Calvary Chapel in Inglewood, which is in Los Angeles area.
Yep.
Is that right? And you're like, what, a few minutes away from Rams Stadium?
Oh, man. Yeah, just a few minutes from the Rams Stadium, pretty close to LAX airport. For anybody that's coming there, about 10 minutes from LAX, 10 minutes from the new stadium. So.
Okay, now wait, I'm in San Diego, so I said the Rams Stadium. Is it also where the Chargers are playing? That's how ignorant I am. Or no, they're not playing here?
I hope not.
You hope not. Okay.
I don't know if
I don't know either.
But I hope not.
They got booted. They left San Diego, and nobody's got a home for them. That's the way it goes. And we're also joined by Tony Clark. Tony Clark is a Marine. And Tony Clark, yep. And Tony, you pastor Calvary Chapel, Newport News in Virginia. Did I say that right?
Yes. Newport News, Virginia. It got its name from when Christopher Newport used to come over here on his ship, and he would bring the news. And so that's how it got its name, Newport News. And so, So we're definitely thankful to be here. Thank you for having me on. And we are about to celebrate our 26th year of starting the church here.
Wow! Congratulations.
Yeah, next month will be 26 years.
Wow, that's a big thing. And you started that church. You guys both started the churches that you're in, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. We started it. I was on staff at Calvary Vista, where Brian Broderson was there, and I left in '94 to come here. I was the first Black senior pastor on the East Coast. God graciously allowed for me to pave the way for a lot of the guys, starting out. So. I've seen a lot in these years. I've seen a lot.
Wow. And okay, that's what we are gonna tap into and learn from you guys. So the reason I thought this would be an important conversation is because our movement of Calvary Chapel began in what was referred to, or what we call today, the Jesus People movement, where a bunch of hippies and drug addicts, and, it was like the sex, drugs, rock and roll time. And all these like kind of counterculture people were getting saved and getting plugged into the churches. And then out of that, these guys are getting raised up, and now they're going out and starting churches. And I don't know what the number is now, but there's a couple thousand Calvary Chapel connected churches around the world. And this church that started in Orange County, California, is now a kind of a global phenomena, if you would, and it's made up of like so many languages, so many cultures, so many different contexts. What started as one thing is now like blossomed into thousands of different expressions of the gospel. And so here we are now. We're all in the U.S., different parts of the United States. And you guys, and both of you have been a part of the movement of Calvary Chapel for a long time. Bill, sorry, let me start. Tony, you started at Calvary Vista. Was that because of your experience being in the Marines?
Yeah, when I was still in the Marine Corps and I came back to the States from Okinawa, Japan. I was stationed at Camp Pendleton. I didn't know anything about Calvary Chapels at that time. I was a assistant pastor in a Black Pentecostal church in Oceanside. But my drive from Oceanside to the part of Camp Pendleton that I was on was an hour drive. I wanted to listen to some Christian radio, and I found K-Wave. And it was as I was listening to K-Wave and I heard teaching for the very first time. You got to understand, in the Black community, there's a lot of preaching. But if you want any teaching, you got to go to Sunday school. But there's not teaching from the pulpit. And I heard teaching for the very first time. I knew that I didn't fit into the common Black Pentecostal scene. I never did fit in. I always wanted to teach some kind of lesson, and I didn't know really how to do that, but I just wanted to. So as I was listening to K-Wave on my hour drive to work, I said, this is it. I said, wow, I never heard this before. Wow, listen, I didn't know that. I was blown away. Every day was like a Christian seminary for me, not knowing anything about Calvary Chapels or anything like that. So as I was pretty much, part of the Black Pentecostal church, whenever I did have an opportunity to speak, I tried to teach. And then after around 2 years of God working in my heart, really, I had been at that church for about 4 years. I just said, you know what, I had to pass Calvary Vista to get to the church that I was serving in. And finally, I just said, you know what, I'm going to start going to this Calvary Chapel here. And it was Calvary Vista at the time. And of course, I talk about how later I end up, after 2 years of being there, I was asked to come on staff, and that was in August of 1991. And so from 91 to 94, I was on staff, and then I came to Virginia, and I can talk about how I got to Virginia a little.
That's awesome. And Bill, you were at Calvary Downey. Was it Calvary Downey you were at before, or what was your journey?
Similarly, I got introduced to Calvary Chapel through the radio. I was in a Black Baptist church, which is like a Black Pentecostal church without tongues. But I was listening to K-Wave, the guy that led me to the Lord. I used to rap. He said, man, don't listen to that no more. He turned my dials to K-Wave. And when I would go to work, I would listen to K-Wave at my workstation. And I found that I was outgrowing the church I was in because of the radio, that just taking in that teaching all day. I was, 8 hours a day, I was getting fed, through these different all the personalities on K-Wave. And eventually I tried one other church, and I just said, man, I got to find a Calvary Chapel. Realized there was none in the inner city, LA, Inglewood, Compton, Watts, Gardena, Hawthorne, there was none. I ended up at Calvary Chapel Downey, and I really wanted to go to Bible college as well. But I was there for about a year, and then I went on staff there. I think I got there in 99. I went on staff at Downey full-time in 2001, and I was on staff there until I left to plant in 2010 while we were sent out to plant Calvary Chapel Inglewood.
Wow, that's fantastic. And
that's a good, let me just say that's a good point, because I remember the same thing happening to me as I was listening to K-Wave. I began to outgrow the church that I was serving in. And the same thing happened with me through the radio, through the teaching.
Wow. That's powerful. What a powerful witness that is. I never heard that. That's really cool. So it's 2020, right? We're talking here. It's 2020. This is the craziest year anybody's seen in our lifetimes, most likely. COVID, we all got locked up, and then George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, it blew up with all these just tension and frustration, and finally, kind of like a voice being heard once again. A lot of white people like me are discovering how hard and how bad from a very, from a white perspective, we're discovering like, wait, things are not good. Things are not okay. And you kind of have this idea, oh, things are not good. Things are not okay. But we're getting better. But to realize like, but we're not moving in the right direction very quickly. And there's no reason for these things to be like this. And my focus, my heart is to see Christians learn how to engage with people who might think, live, and believe differently than they do. And so it's taken me down this kind of passion of interculturalism, which has been my life overseas, realizing this is a big issue here in America. That when I lived in Hungary as an American, I had to deconstruct my Americanism in order to reach people with the gospel from their perspective, because God's not American, and we know that, but God's also not white, and he's not black, and he's not brown, and he's not Asian. And so that means then that I can also deconstruct my culture here in order to reach people for the sake of the gospel. And our communities are hurting right now deeply. And I think you guys, obviously, you guys are more aware of this than ever. Can I talk first about something you've both mentioned? You both mentioned you've come from a black church. Now, one was Baptist, one was Pentecostal, very similar in some ways, except for where they stand on the gift of tongues. Jamar Tisby mentioned something in The Color of Compromise. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. And it's that basically there would be no black church if the white church wasn't so racist, and he's talking historically predominantly, but he carries it into the present as well. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Would there be a black church if the white church had handled things better, or are there other factors that you would want to mention into that?
A matter of fact, I have that book as well, and I'm making my way through it, and he's bridging the gaps or filling in the gaps of some things that I had just assumed, just constantly being fed American history from a white perspective. So he fills in some gaps for me with that. I love history. I've always loved history, and the history is my greatest. I just love history. My kids tease me and said, "Dad, you should have been a history professor." So when it comes to American history, I really love that. And so, but he filled in some gaps. And I believe, I said this before on radio interviews and stuff, I said that racism, the church needs to fix this issue of racism, because the church is the one who allowed it to take place in 1619. When we came over here, the church allowed for slavery to take place, and therefore, if they allowed slavery here in America, therefore, I think the church needs to fix it. And I agree with what he is saying, is that there wouldn't have been any need for black churches if the white churches were not racist, if they had just embraced us. And some tried, and that's why the history of the AME Church, African Methodist Episcopal Church, came about, where there was a black guy, and he talks about it in the book. There's a black guy who was gifted and called and had white people come into the church. And so, but prior to him getting there, he was part of the white church as well. And, but, just racism just began to raise his ugly head to the point where he felt the need to separate. And that's how the AME Church got started, because of the racism in the church. He brought a guy in to speak, and they sat in the section, the white section. And see, already that's a problem. Why do we have a white section in the church? So, and then when they rushed over there and said, you guys can't sit here. This is the white section. They kept praying. They came into church to pray before the guy spoke. They kept praying and said, we're not going anywhere till we finish praying. And then some other folks came up, you can't sit here. And then finally it got so bad where they said, okay, we're leaving. They left, started the AME church as a result of a white section to sit inside of the church. And so if those issues were not taking place, I don't think that there would have been a need for an all Black church. And especially here we are in 2020, still with all Black, all white, all Hispanic churches. Now, if you're in an area where it is all white or whatever, we expect your church to be all white.
Right.
But the way that you can know whether your church can be multicultural is something simple that I was told, and I said I like that. It's go to your local Walmart.
Yep.
Go to your local Walmart. If there's Blacks, whites, and all kind of folks at the local Walmart, then that shows that your church can be multicultural as well.
Right. That's wow. I love that. Bill, let me ask you, do you have any additional thought? And are there like, there's other factors, right? I mean, obviously the only reason the Black church exists is not only racism, it is the predominant. Do you have any more thoughts to that you'd want to add?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, historically, there was a time when Blacks weren't welcomed to worship at a white church. So, which is crazy. It's like these are supposed to be Christians, but the racism ran that deep. So racism was in the church, the white church. So Blacks weren't welcome to come and worship there. So that brought division at that point in time in history. Now, you'd like to think that never existed. Some people pretend as though it never did. But also, I used to be real down on, how come we can't find the type of teaching in the Black church we find in the white church? But then I found that Blacks also, this also trickled down into education, where Blacks weren't able to go to your white seminary. So people like Dr. Tony Evans, there were places when he was getting his education that he was not welcome. Right. He had to get his somewhere else. And so, and those are things where people say, there's no such thing as systemic. Yeah, there is. Yeah. We're dealing with the fact that for years we didn't have access to what everybody else had access to, but under as Christians, And so what that does, like where I minister, the Black community, there are people that can search out that history and know it. And they're like, no, there's white supremacy is born out of, they start mingling it with Christianity. And so it's a roadblock to the gospel when we're preaching. They're like, no, that's the white man's religion. That's their thing. The slave owners were supposedly Christians, your different groups were supposedly Christians. And so today it's real damaging because now we got white people kind of mixing American and Christian. Oh. And so it's like, just let Jesus be Jesus, because there's obviously a lot of things in America that are not, they're not as warm and welcoming to the people that, if you're not a white man, it's not as wonderful as it is, it's not as wonderful for everybody else, So, I definitely see those challenges.
And so we're living in a time when so we have all this history of people being penalized basically because of the color of their skin. So we end up with a situation where the education becomes a problem, as you mentioned. I love that. That's really helpful to understand. I don't think a lot of people have equated it that way. Where is the teaching? Some of that has to do with the fact that there's been no opportunities for just being educated in that. But you two are both pastoring in a white movement. Like Calvary Chapel is pretty white. And I could take the word pretty out of there. It's just white. And so let's talk about this from maybe both sides, because the three of us, we know all the leaders within the movement and everybody, there's a lot of love and there's a lot of wanting to learn and grow from among some of our great leaders. Why do you think that is? Why has the movement, and I think this will go beyond just our own movement, okay? I don't want to just focus on it's not a Calvary issue, but why then today, a movement that started 40, 50 years ago, why don't we have more Black pastors in our movement?
Yeah, that's a great question. And And we cannot expect for the big boys that I call the original guys. We can't expect for them to do it. You got to understand that Calvary Chapel started in, Costa Mesa, in Orange County, an area that has less than 1% Black, less than 1%. So those guys went out and started churches all around. And of course, the churches that they started is going to be white. And the issue is that as they are going out pastoring churches, and they're going to be in suburbia USA, you got the inner city that's hurting. And sure, they would throw some money at and try to do what they can to help, but then they go back to suburbia USA where they live and where their all white congregations are located. And here's the thing. Because I talked about having a multicultural church, I talked about that around the country as well, is that there's a certain sound that is associated with every culture. There's a salsa merengue style with the Hispanic culture. There's a gospel R&B sound with the Black culture. And so you have these sounds. And so you have Calvary Chapel, strum along on the guitar, do their thing. That's what they do in Southern Cal, they strum. And you go in the Black church, there's nobody playing no guitar. It's an organ, keyboard, it's those types of things. Sure, somebody's on the guitar there in the background somewhere with a lead guitar or bass. That's about it. If you have that, but for the most part, it's choir driven. So, what I did was, all I knew was when I came from Southern California to come to Virginia, all I knew was strum alum on the guitar, Maranatha music and all that kind of stuff. So I come to this area and people heard me on the radio. They said, I love the teaching, but that music is out of here. And they would go right out the door. Or some would hear and then they would begin to like the music, like the worship. So seeing that is the case, there are sounds associated with every culture. And so Calvary Chapels are just that Southern California, strum along on the guitar. They took that, those original boys took that and went around the country and just perpetrated that. And then when Blacks or other cultures come in, they're like, I can't get down with that. And so that's why here we are, for us to step out of the Black church, which is more, demonstrative in their worship of God. Everything is loud and crazy and that sort of thing. And so, but that's just our culture. And so they come to Calvary Chapels and see all white people. The music is all white to them. The teaching is all white. And so they go out the door and say, let me go down the street. So, but when you got somebody that's like me or Bill that's been grabbed through the teaching, we're like, okay, we know this music is not what we used to, but we're starving for that teaching, that word. And so it began to grow on us. And I've told people so often that there's a huge difference to me between worship and praise. Worship is us pouring out our hearts to God for all that he's done for us. Praise is talking about what God has done for us. There's a lot of praise that goes on in the Black church, and we sing about those things God has done for us, and that's rooted back in the slavery times and how God brought us through and all that kind of stuff. So there's a huge disconnect between the worship and praise in the Black church and the white church, and therefore because of that, it will draw all whites to the worship. And then the praise, people are going down the road, Black people going down the road and say, I got to get my praise on because what's going on here at this church, nah, that ain't it. And so then there's this thing where they will love the teaching in the white church, but they want the praise in the Black church. And so some would come to our church in the early days and say, we're coming here for the teaching, but we'll go down the street for the praise and for us to get our jump on and run around a little bit. And so that's where a vast disconnect begins to take place. I can go on, but I'm gonna let Bill.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So it's almost like our churches, and then I want to hear from you as well, Bill. Our churches are, this is in cross-culturalism, we call this assimilation. We're expecting people to assimilate to a particular style. It's not about the gospel message, but it's that, hey, this is our style. If you like that, join into our style. And we've been having to grow as a movement into, we can't make people fit our style. We might need to adjust our style. Bill, you have any additional thoughts to that?
Yeah, definitely. When I went to Calvary Downey, that was my first, when I walked in the door and it was worship, and it was like, man, I have to acquiesce to this. I don't like it. It felt like twangy country music.
Yeah.
But I went like Pastor Tony said, I was already at a place where I was hungry for the word. I felt called to preach. I wanted to get my family somewhere where we've been in the word. So we went in saying, we're going to give up our flavor of music for sound teaching. But I never could get what I would bring people to church that they can come with me once. They was never coming back.
Yeah.
And so that was the norm. And so, but something I was going to say, because you had asked about, how come we don't see more, or why do you think there's so few? And this was when I was on staff at that church, and I saw with a lot of Calvaries, there was a huge emphasis on missions, which I thought was great, that they would send people around the world. And it seemed necessary. It seemed feasible. But then, I mean, I was begging to go 15 minutes down the 105, and there just wasn't as much of a heart to see that happen for a long time, for whatever reason, and so I was even frustrated at a church where, as a pastor, you did a mission trip every year. I'm going to Russia, Japan, Mexico, and I'm like, can I go to Inglewood? I want to go to Inglewood. There's a need right there, and eventually I was able to do that, but and I can't speak to why. I don't know why, but I do feel like that it's like something is missed. It's like it's something it's right, 10, 15 minutes away from where a lot of these guys are at. And maybe there's a disconnect. Maybe there's just I'm unaware of it. I don't want to accuse anybody of just not having a heart for it, but it didn't seem as sexy as getting on a plane and going out of the country, for whatever reason. So definitely, that's something it was a frustration of mine, even being part of the movement, where I'm like, why can't we, why won't you guys invest in sending the guy over here, and and then, like for me, I went out and I had, I was helped initially. And it's, it was very, 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 I would say it was the toughest thing I've ever done. 'Cause 6 months out, it was like, all right, man, you're on, and it was difficult, man. It was very, very difficult. I love some other church models for planting. I think the way we plant, it's just, my family never suffered as much as we suffered the first 3 years of doing this thing, and so I think that would make it difficult for some guys. For me, arguably, it'd been easier just to stay on staff at the white church, but I felt called to it,
As the guy that I was the guy in Russia. So sorry about that, Bill. I was the guy over there. No. I'm thinking about that because I'm in my own mind this whole time. I spent 22 years over in Eastern Europe and that part of the world. And in my mind, I'm thinking, like, we've always held this principle. How many times have we all three heard this taught in our churches? We've taught it, but we heard this, like Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth, right? And it was kind of a big shock to me to discover how little movement there's been into many of our churches' Samarias or Judeas, where it's easier, and I think that's a part of the cultural dissidence of it's easier for me to go to a place I absolutely don't know, they don't speak my language, they don't eat my foods. That is an easier jump than into an inner city context where they speak my language, but I don't understand what they're talking about. Their foods are different. It's more demonstrative. That was a good word that was used. It is a different culture, but it's America, and it scares me maybe. And I don't think it's just I think inner city, and we can say, I'm not sure that, and I'd love your thoughts on this, that it was only it's not a color issue as much as inner city is a different world. It's a very different world. And I ended up spending, 15 years of my time in Eastern Europe in an inner city where it was so different than the villages or the towns or the suburbs. And it wasn't a color issue. How do you guys, so here you are now, you've both gone out, you're both pastoring amazing churches. You're wanting to raise people up, and this is something that is kind of, I don't know if this is unique to our movement. You've both been in other movements. I have not. I got saved at Calvary and just been here. I see that a lot of our pastors are the homegrown thing, right? Like guys get raised up from your church and then they go out. And I guess I almost feel like, is that part of why we haven't seen as many African-American pastors to this point? Now it's happening more because you're the ones raising them up. Is it possible because they didn't find a home in the church? It didn't fit for them. And now they're discovering these things. Is that possible? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does make a lot of sense because if you don't have a lot of, Black people coming to the majority white Calvary chapels, then how could they be raised up to be sent out? So right. It's left to us. And I was telling the guy that's down in San Diego as well with you down that way. And I said, bro, if we don't reach our own people, I said, do you expect for the other guys down there in San Diego to reach them? I said, we have to reach them. And if right. you have a disdain for your very own people and our culture and where we came from, then how would others be raised up to go out and teach our communities how to teach the word of God? And I just said, I'm not going to expect for the big boys, the original guys, to raise up people like us. I said, it's our turn now to do that. And if we're not willing to do it, then, I just, one thing I will say is that I remember years ago, the few of us Black pastors, we would be at a conference, we will always find each other, and we will always huddle together. And there will be a quiet kind of chest sticking out when we used to say, yes, our church is majority white. And there will be almost a subtle rejoicing that we being Black is pastoring a majority white Calvary Chapel church. And there'll be a little pride there. But the Lord has made it clear that he wants to reach our people as well. And we know it's clear. Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I would draw all men unto myself. And we know that is speaking about being lifted up in the crucifixion. The application to that, if he's lifted up in the teaching of the word, in the volume of the book is written of him, he would draw all people unto him. So when we teach the word of God, it draws everybody. But what keeps them there, music has a lot to do with it, and then how we make other people feel when they're there. If we make people feel that they are some kind of outsider, or this is how we do church, and you come in, and if you can pick up what we're putting down, then you can stay. But if you don't, you can go down the road to the next church. And so a lot of that has a lot to do with why a lot of Black people are not going to the majority white Calvary chapels, is how they are treated. Not that they be treated badly, but it's just how we feel when we go to these all white churches. Then if we don't feel the warm and fuzzies and that we are welcome there, we'll just go out the back door, unless you have people like me or Bill who is hungry for the teaching of the word, and we'll put up with anything to get almost anything.
Right. You had to fight through though to do that.
Oh, sure. When my wife and I first came to Calvary Vista, there was only 5 Black people at the entire church of 3,000, and my wife and I were 2 of the 5. So, but we stuck it out because we were hungry for that word.
Okay. Wow. And did you now let me ask you, like that's a good example. Vista, is it a city that is the area? What's the demographic? Should there have been many more black people in that church?
Yes and no. It's a majority white, Hispanic, and there are some blacks there. The Oceanside, which is only a stone's throw, is more black that way. But the driving distance is nothing. It's 5 to 10 minutes. You're in Oceanside or you're in Vista. So, but here's the thing, and I tell pastors around the country, if you want more blacks to come, you have to put black people in visible positions. Not just for the sake of putting them there, that they be qualified. I know when I came on staff in '91 and black people saw me either doing announcements or teaching, filling in teaching, they said, oh, okay, even though this is majority white, they have a black person up there. So therefore, it's okay for me to be here. And more blacks started coming to Calvary Vista as a result of that. Wow. And so, and that's a huge thing. So for us, you have to put black people, or if you want a multicultural type of church, you got to put them in visible positions, parking lot, the ushers, greeters, assistant pastors, doing announcements. And that way, people of that culture will see, hey, it's okay for us to be here. This is a safe place. And then they will start coming, and I saw that.
Do you guys we need to add you to the worship conference. We need to learn how to lead worship in other ways. Because I feel like that's a big, I don't know, I mean, because I'm bored of our way of doing worship. I get inspired when I'll go to it, I hear a black gospel choir or something, I want those feelings. I want that. I think we're almost selling a lot of culture short. And so we need you guys to, we need to have your worship leaders come and teach. I'm going to bring your...
That's funny that you say that but here's the thing. If you would look at all the worship conferences, and Bill's been around long enough to know this as well, you know, now they're going after if it's not the big Calvary Chapel churches and their worship teams doing the conferences and stuff like that, then if it's not that, then they're going after some of the big boys, your big groups that's on K-Love and all that kind of stuff. But if they want to know what black worship and stuff is all about, you're going to have to invite these kind of artists to the worship conferences, and not just have the all white worship conferences that we all go to. So when our worship leaders go to these conferences, they just hearing how to perpetuate white Calvary Chapel worship and keep that going. And so, but you're right, there has to be a shift, and it has to be, here's the word, has to be intentional. Right. And that's the word that I've been wanting to get to. It has to be intentional. If you want a multicultural church, you want more black people to come or whatever, you got to be intentional about doing it.
Well, you guys, this has been unbelievable, and I'm gonna kind of pause us for a second, because I want to continue this conversation next week. We're talking here on Crossing Cultures about how we bridge the gap as Christians between those who live, believe, and think differently than we do. And we've been in conversation with pastors Tony Clark and Bill Buffington. And what I'd like to do is continue this conversation next week. We're going to talk about issues like Black Lives Matter and politics and nationalism within the church. And I know it's going to really be a blessing to you. If you've not already subscribed to our podcast, please do. It's also on YouTube, as well as you can follow us on social media on Instagram at crossing.cultures. Thanks for being with us today.